Welcome everyone to my Brownbag talk about budget. Budget is one of the less liked items on a cloud planning agenda. Usually it's not enough, and by the way, the company still wants to know how you spend it. But one thing that I have noticed time and again, and I've seen a lot of customers over the last year, 2 years, is that in many cases the budget could go farther if the workload and the implementation of the cloud were aligned in a meaningful fashion, and this is what I want to present on today. So these are actual quotes from actual customers presented at actual architectural sessions. Yeah, we're buying something with really cool CPUs. Can we run Ceph? This was one of my favorites. Can we run Ceph with 3 nodes and 72 8 terabyte disks per node? Yes, theoretically, yes. In real life, you should probably not. We have only 9 nodes. Can we run a production cloud? Yes. Well, I mean, it's the thought that counts. For now, 2 compute nodes will be enough. That was one of my favorites, a control plane with 10 nodes and two compute nodes. Yes, we can scale out later on, but it would probably make sense if you want to make your internal customers, external customers happy to, let's say, provide a little bit more power. 10 gigabit Ethernet switches are too expensive. And then the same customer complained about storage performance. And I thought OpenStack is free. Well, yes, OpenStack is free. But if you try to deploy it yourself without any external help, you will find out that free can be too expensive. So what's in a workload? I mean, normally in a workload, well, at first the workload is something opaque. Nobody really knows what the workload is going to look like. But one thing that you usually do know is whether it's going to be very memory heavy or very CPU heavy. For instance, let's take Windows. You have, in many cases, you need quite a bit of memory to make it work well. Windows with very small memory footprint is usually not worth the effort. So you would have to say, okay, you have something with 2 CPUs and 8 or 12 or 16 gigabytes of memory to make that run well. And conversely, there are some workloads that are very CPU heavy but use very little memory. So my recommendation is usually to say, okay, we want to plan for 1,000 workloads, and on average we estimate that we are using, let's say, 2 vCPUs and 6 or 8 gigabytes of memory, something like that. Storage capacity, of course, how much do we need? Windows needs a little bit more. They have usually larger boot drives. The Linux workload has a smaller boot drive. Let's say 25 gigabytes per workload. Storage performance, how many IOPS do you need? 25, 50, 100 IOPS on average, of course. I mean, there's going to be instances that are barely doing anything, instances that are a lot heavier or anything. Let's say we want 50 IOPS or something like that. And the larger the cloud is, the better your average is going to work out. If you try something with a very small cloud, let's say 2 compute nodes, and you have 1 workload that happens to have take up more or less most of that server, you're not going to get a good result out of it. And prediction obviously is not easy, but I recommend at least trying. So this is an example. This is also a real-world example that I calculated for a customer. There was an average workload with 2 vCPUs, 6 gigabytes of memory, and they set to budget for 1,000 instances with a 30% scaling, so a total of 1,300 instances in the first iteration. And so we started with what they originally wanted, Xeon E5 2690. This was actually V3, so this is I got a little bit ahead of myself there. This is a 2690 V3 with 512 gigabytes. And we ended up with 21 nodes at a cost of $315,000. With the vCPU that we had, with a 4 times oversubscription, which is what we usually use, OpenStack says 16 times oversubscription. I have not had any positive results with that, so this is that is something that is also taken into account. 4 times usually works fairly well. If we get 1650 instances that we could run with memory, we can get only 1350 instances. Plus, each one of those 2699 CPUs is, I think, $7,000 or something in that realm. So it's $15,000 per node. And then we calculated just as a comparison with 2650 CPUs. We have half the cores, we have 10 cores each, and we only with 256 gigabytes. We still have a disparity between vCPU and memory, but the nodes are drastically cheaper. So you can see where we have, on one hand, we have more nodes. We have 31 nodes instead of 21. But we have, the cost is about 30% less. Plus, you're gaining something. If you have 31 nodes instead of 21 nodes, the failure of an individual node will impact you a lot less than if you have, especially with a cloud that's relatively small. This is not a really large cloud as things go. The impact is the higher, the more instances are running on an individual node. So the better alternative is actually the 2650 V3. By the way, can anyone spot where the one disadvantage of that is? Space. Power, yes, it's going to eat a little bit more power because one, you have 2 system boards, and 2 the CPUs are eating a little bit more power together. But it's not going to be that much of a difference. The real big difference is space. If you have something that has to be very compact because you cannot get more capacity, more actual rack units, then you have to do it that way. So we already have the advantages and drawbacks. And this is how I do my calculations. Originally, this was a very simple calculator that I only wrote in a customer meeting to show the customer something with benefit and disadvantage analytics. So this has a number of input parameters, and that shows you how many instances we can run based on vCPU, how many we can run on memory, and then capacity and performance for Ceph, which I'm going to address right now. So about storage, and this is a really interesting takeaway. Requirement from the same example, we have 100 IOPS per instance and 25 gigabytes per instance. This is still with the same 1,300 instances. With nearline SAS 8 terabyte drives, you need 162 nodes with 12 nearline SAS drives. What was this? Yes, yes, and the problem really is that you cannot hit your performance target or not even come close with a small number of spindles. So you have to branch out and have a huge number of spindles, which produce a lot of operational cost. They cost a lot to buy. You can see this is a $1.7 million Ceph cluster. The reason being that you are basically provisioning 2.8 terabytes per instance just to hit your IOPS number. With 10K SAS drives, the situation looks a little bit better. One, they are smaller, they are 2.5 inch instead of 3.5 inch drives with 1.8 terabytes. So you can still come to 650 gigabytes per instance if you want to hit your IOPS number. And as the 1.8 terabyte drives are actually more expensive than the 8 terabyte drives, quite a bit more expensive per terabyte, you're coming to the same board, about $1.7 million. And as you can see, this is not very budget friendly. So with SSD, and this is where it became really interesting because I had a coworker who dropped by my desk and he said, SSD is way too expensive. Why are you telling the customer to use SSD? So we came up with 25 nodes with 4 1.2 terabyte SSDs. This is little 1U nodes, 25 of them with SSDs, and we were able to hit the IOPS requirements. At a cost, you really only get the 25 gigabytes per instance. You actually are faster that you are going over the IOPS requirement, because here the limiting factor is actually your capacity. You are really locked at 25 gigabytes per instance, but the cluster costs only about $200,000. So the coworker was telling me before, well, you can't do that, that's way too expensive. All of a sudden saw that it's not necessarily expensive. The old compute paradigm that you are, or storage paradigm that you are calculating the cost per terabyte doesn't apply in a cloud setting anymore. You usually have comparatively small storage requirements, but you need a lot of IOPS to run a lot of instances. And this is where we are running with the capacity. Okay, this is the other half, or another part of the cloud model calculator. There's still a number of parts missing, but they don't really pertain to what we are talking about right now. So you can see again, you have usable capacity that's necessary, and you have raw capacity, and then you get in the end, you get to 25 nodes. It also tells you this is the number of recommended physical CPU cores per node and the recommended memory per node. But this is basically, these are the actual values that are used in my calculation. It's probably a little bit more expensive because the CPU costs are a little bit underestimated. But this is the relationship. Whether it costs $200,000 or $250,000 in relationship to $1.7 million does not really make a difference. But what I want you to take away from this talk is the important part in building a cloud or designing a cloud is not well, you don't want something flashy. The one thing that you and I are measured by is how happy our customers are. And the customers are going to be happy if you get them the performance that they need. It doesn't have to be more performance, it just needs to be performance that you need. And the question is really, how do we get that performance best out of what we have in budget? Thank you very much for attending. I hope it was useful, and I would welcome questions.